Yep, so Chris Warfel had submitted draft amendments to section 513 of the zoning ordinance related to accessory apartments, and the planning board has been asked to provide a recommendation to the town council following their review of those draft amendments. I did provide my comments following my review in a written memo. It lays out some of the, I tried to summarize some of the key policy level changes that were incorporated within those proposed amendments, and some recommendations or some areas of consideration based on those amendments. I think one of the key things, and maybe obviously Chris will speak tonight, and maybe he can provide some, what his thoughts or intent was for some of those changes. But one thing, it seems as drafted that they're all would be considered affordable accessory apartments, which would have some sort of an income limit or restriction on occupancy. Currently, accessory 513 apartments can be any income level. They're not, they do of course provide an attainable, a diversification of the housing stock, and are affordable with like the lowercase a, but they're not deed restricted. So that's currently the 513 accessory apartments. There's that accessory section that really hasn't been utilized, that we've talked about maybe reworking a bit. But in general, those 50 current 513 apartments are not considered affordable deed restricted housing units. Some other areas were making it the 513s, giving a little more flexibility with the square footage. Currently it's 1,200 square feet, and this proposes a special use permit for greater than that. So as you're aware, the planning board's been working on amendments to section 513 for several months now. So that's something that the planning board has been talking about and considering. So some of these do overlap, but I guess for the purposes of tonight, since there is a time constraint with responding to these, we can focus on just the amendments that are within what was proposed to the town council. There were some other areas. I mean, I don't know, Margie, do you want me to walk through the memo or?
Well, while we were waiting for you to get on, Chris did say that he agreed with some of the suggestions that you have in the memo. So maybe if you'll let Chris talk first,
Okay.
and then we can go through it on the memo with the pages so that you have a general idea of what we would like to see changed, and then we can work from there. Will that work for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can, as the topic or sections come up, I can provide some additional thoughts.
Okay, fine. Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Thank you for going through the results. First of all, the fundamental error, I think, the way I approached this, and you noted it in your first comment, basically, with what I wrote, it would affect attainable housing, year-round housing for people. It was not my intent to redefine attainable year-round housing and put that into affordable housing definition. So there's a fundamental question for everybody, or to you, is it better to have this one ordinance contain what I would call attainable housing, which is no income limit, but year-round residents, and A, and B, affordable housing, which is income restricted or rent restricted for year-round residents? Have one ordinance with both of these within it, or should there be two separate ordinances, one for attainable and one for affordable? Why I'm asking that is, if you think these are two different programs, let's call them, I would rewrite what I submitted to reflect this. But that's a pretty big mistake that I made in the beginning. I did not mean to take the attainable year-round housing as part of this like I did.
My question would be, could we do two sections, one for housing that is as it is, and then that is restricted, all within the same memo? that would be a question Allison would have to guide us on. But I personally don't see the reason why there couldn't be two sections in the same memo that would cover both the restricted and unrestricted. Anything else you want while you're up there?
Her note on compound interest versus, it just is correct. I made a mistake on the wordage. And I can remove that. And I also think I made a mistake, or there's maybe another approach on, we'll call, let's say, a clawback on money that's been granted, but not used in its entirety for the intended purpose of affordable housing. So that's in the chart, probably we'll talk about that right now, but those are the major things that I think address.
Okay. Allison, any comments?
I heard Chris, I heard the comment on the the compound interest, but then the third thing Chris was addressing, I couldn't understand.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm calling it clawback provision,
Oh.
because that's the term that we use in my industry. And that is, I may have actually reversed that conceptually in how I wrote it. And in order to get that really straightened out, my assumption is that there is a reasonable time that grants can be given to somebody for the intended purpose of affordable housing. And if that intended purpose gets shortcut for whatever reason, and you pointed out some good ones, then what is a reasonable expectation of the remainder of the time period that the grant money should be repaid back for? In other words, this is a 15-year grant, and let's say it gets cut short in year 10. Should they pay back basically a third of that grant in 5 years of that? So that could be worked also. I may have actually switched it to the clawback. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's why I wanted like multiple examples, because I wasn't sure what the intent was with the payback, what the policy was that was being proposed. Were you penalizing people that only used it a little, or penalizing people that used it a lot, and the formula there? So I thought that needed a little more review and examples to fully understand if that was what was being proposed was what was intended.
In the town council meetings and some other meetings, which I can't recall what they were, there was a discussion of what is a reasonable time period that grants are given for that grant. And if it's not, if it's a loan, is this a 20-year loan, 15-year loan? What would the town think would be a reasonable time period that if they gave money or lent money, that structure should be used for the intended purpose that the grant was provided? That's discussion of, Rashish, I think has to happen. Because I think in 15 years is reasonable, but we may have other.
Chris, this is Bill Landry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Usually the money that's given for subsidies for affordable housing is from a program that carries with it a certain time period during which the unit has to be deed restricted for affordable housing. The Low and Moderate Income Housing Act, for example, requires at least 30 years deed restriction. A lot of towns require 99 years, but whoever's giving the subsidy will indicate and have documentation that specifies a minimum duration for the affordability restriction. And unless it's the town that's providing a financial subsidy, I don't think the town's going to be able to revise whatever the subsidizing agency has come up with. That documentation is usually filed on the title as part of the deed restrictions. So I think the town probably for zoning purposes, should specify, if it wants to, a minimum period of time that the unit has to be deed restricted for affordable housing. And, it must be at least the minimums provided by the subsidizing agency, and then maybe some more, but usually the minimums are like 30 years, you know, and it's a little bit unusual, but no, by no means impossible or infeasible to make it easy for affordable units to flip back and forth from affordable units to non-affordable units. It's a policy issue, but the town may not want to have so much flip-flopping. If the unit's characterized a certain way and has a benefit associated with that, you know, it may not want to provide a short horizon during which it could flip back to market rate housing.
And I think, Bill, in this case, what about, they're talking about if the unit became no longer a housing unit, just extinguished. So it would be those accessory apartments that are currently serving as housing units, but say the property owner decides, I don't want anyone living in that accessory structure. I'm just going to use it for recreational purposes or company. So where it's not that it's switching to market rate, but that they just want to remove the kitchen and not have it be a housing unit. And if this follows the town, if the town had a policy where it's financially supporting the creation of those accessory apartments and giving people funding to create them, what is the policy if the property owner decides after 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, whatever it is, 30 years, they don't want to have that be a housing unit any longer? I think that was the purpose of that policy, was for those instances where it would no longer be a housing unit.
That did lead to me thinking about this, and I wrote down, I think affordable and attainable housing, what happens is really kind of a dynamic thing. Units will come and go, and a long, deep, restricted period, I don't think is going to be helpful to encouraging affordable or attainable housing. I think what's going to happen is there will be, you know, an influx of this. Some people will say, I don't like it, will fall out. Other people say, I would like to try and build one because I could use the income, or I just want to do this for the island. So I see this as a dynamic situation. And that's why I kind of settled on 15 years. I think for most people, 15 years is a reasonable time horizon. And if it works, you know, if they like it, they can continue. If not, they don't feel like they've hurt themselves, that's the right word, by having to enter into a 99 or 30-year agreement. Trying to devise some flexibility, that dynamicism into this ordinance.
Now that fits in with what I was concerned about, having to do with property being sold, or if you have the death of the owner and the new family coming in doesn't want it. So there has to be some way that we can manage the property and then have it be pulled out of the attainable affordable housing because of family circumstances having to do with the change of ownership.
Margie, I think I should just mention that all of the 513s are attainable. We don't have any 513s that are affordable by what, like exactly what Chris and Bill are talking about. They're attainable. So I think maybe what Chris Warfel said in the beginning, separating it out. So you're having a discussion about attainable housing and then move on to the affordable part.
Affordable housing, okay.
Marty, the last time we talked about 513, it was pointed out that of all the 53 attainable units, nobody took advantage of whether tax credits or tax
Yes.
incentives, which I thought was interesting.
Correct.
That wasn't, and I don't know the specifics of it. And all the units, however, are attainable. So the focus, I think if you want to encourage or incentivize property owners affordable, it's gonna have to be, in my opinion, some type of subsidy with a clause of payback if it's not determined.
Right, and that's probably not section 513. That's a new section
Right.
that you 513 is a permitted use. So if you're changing something as far as like setbacks, lot coverage, anything like that, you might want it to go into the 400 section or part of it, and part that be allowed by right. So
That's my question is, this seems to just change its sector from to AAH, change the name of it, while affordable attainable housing is more of a revenue stream, 514 is kind of a piece of it. One way it can be approached, as we have a couple of ways approached, so it might be better to have a more overall description of the attainable or affordable housing, and then have the different ordinances that support those goals.
I can tell you, like, I did a little list. I made a list of the home ownership and the rentals and how they were created under what sections of the ordinance, just so you can see that 513 is a tool, but we have other tools to use. Section 405, the plan development, comprehensive permit, which is only one application or one project, plan development, 513, 405 was used numerous times. And then the 50 apartments under section 513. So 405 is where you would find the regulations for affordable. And 513 is attainable. And I think mixing the two of them get pretty confusing, but if you just create a new section that deals with rentals for affordable.
And I think that Chris, my question for you is, in changing the definition of accessory apartment to AAH, it still says that it's within the residence, right, or within the property, is that what it says? So, but it, or in an accessory structure. So the accessory structure is defined by another part of the ordinance as accessory structure. So is it saying that accessory affordable housing can be considered? I just answered my own question. So you don't need to answer that, but I think that this is a very broad description, and then it's screwed it all into 513. And you might be actually eliminating yourself. And eliminating what could be done.
Yep. And it could eliminate some of the 513s, or it might not encourage more of them if the property owners are going to be deed restricted for 10 years, 50 years, whatever. They don't have the flexibility to remove the kitchen and abandon them.
But that's if it was
Would they only,
incentivized.
exactly.
Well, yes, but you could do that through a different
Right.
section, depending on,
It would be its own section,
yes.
ultimately.
Yes.
Inside of
That's something that seems much cleaner, because it was unintended, and that's the first thing I noticed based on Allison's comments. So I don't think it's community want to remove something that has been around for so long, and yet keeping units. The intent was to actually create something specific more towards affordable housing. It was just the verbiage of 513, which said attainable accessory housing apartments, accessory apartments. And to me, that was not a good title for this section. So maybe we should switch it to attainable and affordable housing. Just change the section title, kind of put that in. Then have one section on attainable, which is mostly what is in here, then one section on affordable. As he said, split it into two different kinds, so there are two.
Yeah, I agree.
So if that is, if you want to make the motion to do that, we can discuss whatever you think here is appropriate and good, and I'll go back to the drawing board and rewrite a section on affordable housing that you can consider. We definitely will do that. Wasn't my intent to remove year-round housing.
Allison,
Just a quick question. I want to confirm that the state will recognize an affordable 513 that's deed restricted as an affordable home is counted as part of that housing stock.
Okay, so this is where, in order to get counted on the low mod chart, currently it's up to 120% AMI. But actually, if it's a rental, I'd have to look at that, the maximum income, the area median income bill, but
It's 80% for rentals.
yeah. And this gets to what Bill was saying earlier about it has to be a minimum, it's going to be a long-term time commitment. And yeah, so it's going to be a lower area median income. It's going to be a longer, in perpetuity. I mean, typically it's 99 years, but and it requires monitoring. There's some, typically there's a monitoring agent for anything that's on the low mod chart to ensure that it's being occupied by someone that's eligible and so it's possible there can be accessory apartments that become eligible for incorporation on the low mod chart. Currently, we do not have any.
Well, we have, not under 513, but we have the ball housing. Yeah, East Searles Ball, that counts.
But yeah, section 513 I'm talking about.
Yes, right. Just,
It's possible, but yeah, it would be deed restricted and a longer term, there's time limits and things.
Chris, you have a question?
Well, speaking of 513, I've been bringing up some of the points that was made in discussions previous to this, was expanding the definition of 513. And Gail, I think you brought up size. If we want to increase the inventory of 513, we have the flexibility, whether it's in density or size, those are the considerations we have. Considering that they're all attainable. Okay. What's the next thing? If they're attainable, incentivization is going to come under affordable, which is going to be a different, as I understand it, different section on 513. What changes can we make that can possibly expand the inventory? Because right now, as I understand it, it's a 2-bedroom apartment.
Right.
That's not really feasible for most families. So what can we do in that regard? And I think there was some over, I'm trying to find it, Chris, but you made some suggestions on expanding square footage, things like that. I would rather focus on like bedrooms. I don't care what the square footage is.
The state does.
Well, if I could comment on that, because I have been an advocate for not limiting bedrooms or square footage. And I unfortunately missed the meetings you guys have had, and I'm wondering if you've had input from a lot of different people coming forward with that problem. Because I do believe that 2 bedrooms, I just don't think these accommodations should be limited. I think they should be limited by our current zoning regulations and septic system regulations versus just pulling numbers out of a hat.
We have 2 end groups. We have families and we have non-families. And the families are centering probably around 3 bedrooms. The non-families are centering around most 2. So you have, and so the families are, different target group, they group by the 2. But they're more of a 3-bedroom. The square footage was in our survey, and I can't recall what that was, but I remember how the survey bifurcated between, I'll say, like families and non-families. Yeah, 2-bedroom max, non-families, 3 bedrooms, sorry for families.
And I think square footage actually is a good indicator for that, because there are houses with 3 bedrooms that have 1,200 square feet. That is not unheard of, but I think that if we want to have an opportunity for families that need 3 bedrooms to have 3-bedroom rentals, as opposed to our home ownership program that we currently have, then we might consider raising that a little bit.
Well, and even if you have a family of 5 and you have 2 teenage kids that are mixed gender and a 3rd child, and you really would benefit from 4 bedrooms, you might not need more than a certain number of square feet, but you want the ability to have those bedrooms. I just think if we want to expand on our current 513, it would behoove us to not have limitations that are not outside of our current zoning regulations. And in my opinion, if everything is regulated by special use permit, it's not a guarantee they're gonna get it, and it can also be a deterrent.
It isn't, it's permitted. They don't have to go through a special use permit
But
process.
you would if you were going higher than 1,200 square feet, but it's not even an option, right now, correct?
Well, you could go to the zoning board and ask for a variance on that section, but it isn't, it's allowed by right. So you don't have to go through zoning right now.
So am I understanding correctly, you don't have to get any kind of approval if you're going over 1,200 square feet?
If you go over 1,200 square feet, you would have to go to the zoning board.
Correct, that's
for
what I'm
a
trying to
variance.
say. I
Yeah.
think we should probably try to change that.
So I can give you some feedback just based on people who've come into my office and asked me about 513. One is increasing this square footage from 1,200 to whatever you decide. The number of bedrooms, allowing a bonus for lot building coverage, because maybe somebody would want a garage, and willing to put a 513 on the second floor, but they're at their lot coverage. So that's something that I have talked to a few people about. Right now, the commercial zones that allow seasonal occupancy would be Service Commercial, Old Harbor Commercial, New Harbor Commercial. It's been talked, a few people have mentioned, what about mixed use? What about RC? So you could look at those other zones that might have an inn or some sort of business, so that they would be for their employees. And right now, it could be seasonal, but you could decide whether or not you want it to be seasonal or year round if you expand those zones.
Were there any more responses to the town survey on housing?
You had a few more, right, Allison? A few more to
Yeah, it was, I think 38 today. What did we have last week? 29 or something, about 10 more since our meeting. Or since Monday.
I think that's the important tool to just know what the need is. So, you know, we have to probably for some things and those responses, like people who are already.
Can you move your microphone a little closer because I can't?
People who already own homes, maybe that's a different program. You know, they might not be the highest priority. People who need affordable housing, but if we take those out, how many people that responded have a household size that requires 3 bedrooms, you know, and so that's how many asked for it, but that doesn't match household size. So that have the respondents. Right, so we can determine what the actual need is and say, well, a certain percentage of our 513s could be about this size based on our need.
I don't know how you would determine.
I don't see the,
Yeah,
what's, why get that specific? I mean, 513 is a 513. We're trying to increase the inventory. There's already existing inventory of 53, which we know is limited to no more than 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms. Moving forward, those aren't going to change. So if anybody's interested in doing a 513, or there might be existing dwellings that would fall under 513 if that was expanded. That's kind of my idea, or the reasoning behind increasing square footage. I don't think, because this is we're attempting to do, I think, affordable and table or the definition in a separate section, being specific to family size or income size in this, in 513, I don't think is feasible. It'd be very, never mind the fact that we have to enforce this, which I'm gonna get to. There's a whole nother conundrum, but, say, out of 60, and, 15 have to be allocated for a certain demographic or a certain income level or a certain family size, I think it's problematic, particularly.
I think that's how it works in a lot of communities. I think that, especially if they're going to be designated as affordable, and they're going to have to be monitored.
Right, but this is the attainable part of it, so
Attainable.
separate that out, keep the attainable 513.
We're saving that for another.
We haven't written a
Right.
section for restricted yet. Yeah, Gail, go ahead.
Well, we had just recently received a letter from a family who currently have 2 acres. They're on Gracies Cove. They have 3, what I would consider dwellings, but I guess because the third doesn't have a kitchen, it isn't a dwelling, but they have 3 structures on their property, and they would like to have 2 of them as 513s. Currently, one of them is a 513. The second one is occupied. It has 2 bedrooms and a living area, and it's allowed to be occupied. It has a residential accessory structure status, but it's currently not allowed as 513 because of our limitation of, do we have a limitation? Only one,
2 dwellings per lot,
right.
which
So
is,
this would make it 3 dwellings per lot. So I also recommend we release that restriction. So, because here's a perfect example of structures that are already there. It's a very attractive property. I don't know, I shouldn't even say that because that's just a matter of opinion. But the buildings were all built per current zoning regulations. They're all utilized per current zoning regulations. In order for them to turn the third structure into a year-round or 513 status, is we have to change these regulations.
I think, that kind of, in my eyes, we're also discussing large home status. That the sentiment that I've heard is more dwellings and not necessarily one big dwelling, but so I see it kind of dovetailing the discussion a little bit.
Exactly. And this allowing this inspires people to do what they can do. And in my profession, I see people ask us all the time, how big can the structure be? Talk to your building official. Well, I would love to do the 513, but I want to be able to maximize my structure size
Yeah.
and the living square footage size. So if they're shot down with the 513 application because the structure size is then too big, they're going to just build that structure and use it the way they want to use it versus being inspired to do the 513.
Well, I think using existing dwellings is exactly what we should be doing, and if they're already existing, then I think they should be size. But if we're just talking about new building, and that's going to go over their allowed size, then I think.
well,
But I'm
it's,
saying stay within the current zoning regulations, not what's allowed, as
and
long as they're staying within.
when 513 first started, it was 406, and it was, and then it went to 513, and it was allowed in existing buildings. So it was like, if you had a garage on your property, maybe it didn't meet the setback or whatever the situation is, then you could apply for the 513 to have in the existing, but
Mhm.
it's changed numerous times over the years, so. That's kind of
I
where it
want to
started.
to your comment. We have structures on the island that are too big under the present 513 regulations that I think could be grandfathered in for 513s, as opposed to allowing that size for a new construction.
But that's what and pardon me for debating this point, but I don't understand if the building is already allowed and bodies are already allowed to sleep in them, why can't they then be allowed to be that 513 status? Because you're allowed to build the garage, you're allowed the 2 bedrooms, you're allowed the living room, but it's 1,700 square feet altogether in living space. So the structure is allowed per zoning regulations. They don't have to get a special use permit. They haven't exceeded the 2,000 square foot threshold. They're just going by regulation, but, oh, sorry, you're not going to do the 513, you built the building today.
Well, what's the advantage of having the 513 to that person if they already have permission to have a residential dwelling? there's no
This is
incentive
to put
for
a
much
kitchen in.
affordable.
Well, but, you know, you just don't know. I guess that's the question. Why, you know,
Putting in a kitchen, just to be very clear with you guys. You guys think putting in a kitchen-
I gotta interrupt you for a second. I think everyone needs to use the microphone or Allison won't be able to hear and the YouTube won't be able to hear. So if you wanna, thank you.
Sorry, you guys are talking a lot about high level theory on this without
I don't know what
really
his
speaking
name
on
was.
this outside of Gail from what I can tell. But like, putting in a kitchen is not an advantage to somebody who's building 513. They're providing attainable housing for the island. So to think that giving somebody a stove essentially is something great, it's really not. This is coming from somebody who's bought a property here, wants to put a 513, and I'm somebody who my lot coverage is too small because I bought a lot that's just under 2 acres and somebody that put 2,000 square feet up. But the real question for you guys is, do you want to build more attainable housing for this conversation? Or are you guys trying to preserve lot size? Because it sounds like that's really the internal fight going on here. But if you're really trying to address the attainable housing and that's your priority, then you're gonna have to let that go to some degree, because you can't completely have it both ways. Because what's happening from Chris's standpoint is that Chris is going to the land trust now and barking up that tree, which will, in my personal opinion, probably ruin what you guys are really prizing on the how much lot coverage we can use. The land trust side of things will ruin that Block Island side a lot more than what you guys are dealing with that's in front of you now, that I think is the solution to a lot of the attainable side of this.
Thank you. What is your name?
I'm Ray Schuster.
Just one question.
Yeah.
Like, you're talking specifically to lot coverage regulations, right? Like, what's allowed on the lot? You have a 2 acre lot, you're built out, you want to put an accessory structure on.
To be honest, I need to put a garage because my John Deere, I have a trailer.
Yeah.
I have a trailer. I live at Fran Migliaccio's old property, if you know where it is. If you drive by Sands Pond, you will see an 18-foot trailer at my house. Because I can put my John Deere in there, because I cut my own grass and I don't have anywhere to put it.
Right.
Now, I have to decide if I want to put up a 600 square foot garage for my John Deere, or if I want to put up a 513. And I would love to put up a 513, because the way things are written now, it just doesn't really make sense for, to optimize it. We can have a practical win-win here. I just think there's some small changes.
So increase density.
Well, it's not density, it's building lot coverage.
It's still,
That's
by
what
the
he's
way,
talking
I
about,
think
building
there's,
lot
I'm
coverage.
sensitive to the density part of it as well. So I don't want to say that you guys are crazy for thinking that way. I moved out here because it's beautiful, right? But at the same time, there's somewhat of a give and take here when you're pulling that road.
So lot coverage.
So it's, right,
I want to
so,
remind everybody, we always look at two sides of the story. You've got one side, but then we're going to have another side to talk to us if we change lot coverage and suddenly they have another structure that they didn't buy into when they bought their property because it was a certain zone. They definitely came because it wasn't overcrowded, it wasn't overbuilt, et cetera, et cetera. So there are always two sides to look at, and we have to do both sides.
I got it. It's good.
Yes, but it's just, because it's not a little one-sided, I gotta let you know,
No,
this
it's
other
over
side has gotta be
lot
looked
coverage.
at. All of us are in this
And
together,
like, right,
so.
we still have to
And I
meet
also hear
your
to
36 zoning dimensional standards.
certainly find solutions for affordable and attainable housing and balance the rural areas as well.
So what if you just allow 1% for 513s? An additional 1% of coverage for 513s?
Which is fine,
And then-
but suppose you take that 513 away 10 years from now.
Well, you'll have to think about if you
gotta think
want
about
to,
it. That's good.
if you want to add some sort of language that it must be rented as a 513 for, I don't know, however many years. You're not, well, I mean, it doesn't, whatever you decide.
Yeah,
I mean,
but again, if you put too many restrictions on the property, then that's going to be hard for the owners to either buy into the program, or maybe will not want to be in it at all because they're afraid that they're won't be able to sell their property at a time they need to.
well, they're getting
Yes, within the
something,
bounds.
yeah, but they're getting something extra. They're getting the extra 1% coverage. And if the property owner really would like to have a garage in exchange for the 513, maybe it does
But
work.
that's how I look at it, is that example where you know, you sell your house down the line, but you were able to put a garage on it, and the reason there's a garage is because there's a 513 above it. If you don't want the garage, then you don't get the 513 and you don't get the space above it.
Right.
That's how I look at it.
If you meet all of the zoning dimensional standards, then you can abandon it. You keep it both, where you can still abandon it, like what Margie's saying, if you meet all your dimensional standards. But if you get the 1% bonus for density era for building lot coverage, then it has to remain a 513.
And the 513 goes with the land,
Right.
not with the ownership.
I mean, I'm against abandoning altogether. I think that when I read that 3 months ago, when we started talking about this, I just doesn't sit well with me to
Well, it
begin with.
has to be in there because people will then.
Because they make sure
They have to,
I understand, it just, the sort of,
Yeah,
I think if there's a bonus attached to it, though, that's.
we all talk about unintended consequences.
Yeah, I
We just have to
think
make-
we can look at that one.
Okay, Chris, you okay?
Yes, I wanted to support what Jen Free said about perhaps just because you want, you know, we're under the supposition or assumption that the town is going to try to develop more affordable housing. Increasing allowable lot coverage specific for the purpose of affordable housing, to me, is something that I have written in various sections of here. The danger I see, these are those two sides of that argument, is that someone does this with the intention of abandoning it and then having structure. And I do not know a way to counter that unless you want to put something very restrictive on, you know, deed restriction, which I was trying to get away from in order to, like I said, this is a dynamic situation. Build it, okay, if you don't want it anymore, somebody else, that they have to pay money back. They pay money back, that money is restricted for another grant for somebody else for affordable housing. So that way you can funnel the money around, who's a affordable house structure here, being over here. So I like the idea of increasing lot coverage specific. Affordable housing, you know, that, we came here for really affordable housing mostly, and so that's what I'm focusing more on. So anyway, I just want to support with that concept.
But I do think there are a lot of community members that need the attainable housing that might not meet the income guideline. 80%, I mean,
Yeah,
that's pretty low for year-round apartments.
wasn't that even with the affordable, let's see if we'll let it now.
The affordable for home ownership is 120.
Was it, weren't we trying to get that to 140?
Yes.
And that's in the works. So on the other side, on the rental side, it would make sense that that would have to change as well.
I don't know if that's.
And I don't know if that's to be counted
Right.
towards our inventory, right? That,
Right, but
I mean,
I don't know if, Chris, are you really thinking rentals for affordable or rentals for attainable? Because 80% AMI is the,
Okay, so there's other things that have to go into this calculation. If we bifurcated attainable and affordable, as I think we should, you know, the town incentivize affordable housing by taking it off the tax rolls once it's used for affordable housing. Okay, so that is no incentive to go towards the landowner. If it's attainable, I don't think it really should be taken off the tax rolls because there's much higher income potentially coming in from that property. So I feel it should be taxed. So there's, I hate to say carrot and stick, which is called different incentives.
Mhm.
For this, if you would like the lot coverage to be attainable and affordable, and those two, then I think I would add stipulation that is something, different incentive rates for affordable that is more of an enhancement that is for team. Taking property tax rules for affordable, not for attainable is one way of doing it.
and just keep in mind, in 1 acre lot in the residential A zone, for example, I mean, if you increase 1% bonus for building lot coverage, it's 435 square feet, so it's not huge.
Only
I mean-
1 acre lots are really good.
How many? Well, I'm just throwing an example. I mean, I don't think it,
They're
you
not
could have
a lot in the.
Yeah, I mean, you could have-
Residential area. Most of them are in
2 acres is what we
2 acres to
see,
3
yeah.
acres.
So that would be 860.
Yeah, and going back to the discussion about looking at the other zones too, what would that look like if we increase that frontage with affordable apartments on the other zones?
The other zones have, the lot building coverage is pretty high. It's really adding other zones to the commercial part of the ordinance, the 513 ordinance. Right now, it's service commercial, Old Harbor commercial, New Harbor commercial. And I've had a few people that are come in and talk to me about RC, RCM, and they're limited to one.
But they have enough lot coverage.
Yes. Lot building coverages, okay, 16% in those zones. But if they could create 2 513 apartments for staff is what I've heard. And then number of bedrooms, I've heard that from several property owners that they would like to have 3. But
Well, in the spirit of productivity, what's the consensus from bedrooms or, 1,200 feet is the limit now, is 1,500 feet a step?
I think there should be a limit. I'm just thinking my heels in the ground on that.
Yeah, I
one.
know.
I think it should be per town zone ordinance.
Because somebody will take advantage of it, I would have to disagree with you completely.
they
How are
can't-
they taking advantage if they're already allowed to build that? That's my point. I'm trying to get across is if they're already allowed to build it, and some people already have it. But even more so, people building in the future, because this problem isn't gonna go away. It's only gonna increase as Block Island becomes more popular. So if they're already allowed to build the 1,800 square foot of living space in an accessory structure,
Mhm,
why would we prevent them from making it a 513?
Based on just their lot size.
right,
Yeah, based on their lot
Yeah.
size and they're going by all the regulate, they have the septic capacity for it, they have the room for the additional septic if they want to add a separate septic.
I'm for existing buildings that are oversized up to like 1,500 square feet or something. But to build new structures that are unregulated any size, I think is.
well, it
But
is.
like I'm saying, you're putting bodies in the building anyway. Why can't they be there year round?
And it is regulated by their dimensional standards. Like I think what Gail's saying is if you have if you build an accessory residential structure, which is no kitchen, bedrooms, bathroom, there's no limit on what size it can be other than the large house ordinance. But then if you make it a 513 for year-round housing, you're limited, right?
And they
Is
can
that what you're
put,
saying?
that's what I'm saying, they can put 4 bedrooms in it because they have the septic capacity or the space to add a septic. They have the ground for it, they meet all their setbacks, they meet all the,
What is the income
DEM
guidelines for
regulations.
attainable housing?
There isn't.
So does the town set that?
No.
income guidelines for town?
It's year-round.
That's all. So it could be any income for attainable. What makes it attainable? Just,
It's year-round. It's year-round housing.
so there's no income protection.
No.
Sorry, I'm late. I thought this was second on the agenda and they blocked off Grace Cove Road. But I thought that-
Don't apologize, I switched because there were so many people here. I want to make sure we got through everything that we wanted to hear from people today, so.
The only thing I want to talk about at this moment, I'd like to talk about income later. But you're worried about the size of something. I have a 2-bedroom, 513, it's under 700 square feet. I wouldn't, 4 people in there might drive themselves nuts, but the people who've been in there, multi-single or a couple, have loved it, very comfortable. I could very easily turn it into a 3-bedroom for 1,000 square feet. My house is 5 bedrooms, it's 1,900 square feet. You don't need big square feet for an accessory apartment.
You're not building electric, and also who's ever building this accessory apartment, you're not gonna make money on it. So they don't need to build a 3,000-foot accessory apartment if it's throwing money away, it's too big. So if you want to be reasonable, stay within, trying to balance everything. You don't need huge structures, you don't need huge apartments. That's all I'm gonna say. I'll talk about the income stuff later, but I just want to, you're wrestling with that issue. I just want to throw some numbers out there.
And Doug, you can expand the 2-bedroom you have now because you have a lot of, you have enough land.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but I
that's,
wasn't
it.
add 100 square feet.
Yeah,
But you can't have the 3-bedroom because we're limited to 2.
Right.
My point in talking square footage is because it never fails, someone will end up with 1,525 square feet and are not going to be allowed to do it. And it's within 25 square feet because it's an absolute. So maybe there just aren't absolutes. You have to figure out how you can
Well,
be
the other option is
reasonable.
to do a special use permit.
Especially for-
That's how you do it, get rid of the absolute.
Right, they can go to the
Language
zoning
we
board
submitted,
now,
so we
yeah.
had- We had.
You ask for a special use
Without
permit,
a-
I actually like that.
E dot, one.
Yeah, and we do have some very quirky properties that have,
Yeah.
the possibilities of doing perhaps 2 or maybe, or so, 513, but they don't fit in with the absolutes, as they call it. But with a special use permit, we'd be able to make a reasonable exception and justify it.
Yeah, I think that's important because, as you said, everything, you know, there's always.
There's gotta be some, there's gotta be some checks and balances.
Yeah.
And all like checks and balances. It's just a question of how we're gonna do it.
So, yeah, I just want to point out that I did that.
Yeah, I know, I like that idea. I made a note to tell you I liked it.
And 1,200, to Doug's point, our house is 1,200 square feet, it's small, I think 4 people in there, it works.
And we, again, we could take the number 1,200 and leave it, and we could go to 13 or 14. But we put a limit on it so that you don't get somebody coming in and wanting to do a 3,000 square foot, which would just be a real problem for all the neighbors.
Right.
But could you argue that the limit ought to be the one that's already in existence for an accessory structure?
You might be able to argue for that, and maybe make 2.
I think we're talking 2 different things. I think the expansion, when Gail brought it up the first time, was there were existing structures that could be 513s, but they don't qualify.
Right.
So that's one item, and then the other item is moving forward. And I think Chris in his memo cited a couple of examples of moving forward, having 2 on a property, increasing the square footage. Were just a couple of examples. So there's, you know, to increase the inventory immediately, that change would need to be made. And then I don't want to count it as a separate part of it, but then there's the new structure end of it. You know, Gail, when you talked about it the first time, you cited specific examples of, like, not just one, there was a few. And that to me is more compelling. But we also have to think about moving down the line when they're built. Again, the side effect, loopholes, et cetera. Jen, how many 513 floor bays that you know?
8.
8.
We have to consider it should go by acreage too. If you have 5 acres, it's a lot of land, and built structures are typically larger. And they fit, you know, it's the scale works. So again, yeah, maybe that the sub is the way to go, but I still think 1,200's small.
So if you follow Gail's logic, and the fact is that there is an unlimited number of accessory buildings that can be built on a property, can anybody find fault with allowing same unlimited number of accessory buildings to become 513s?
So should I turn in our next agenda, that's what we are discussing, to regulate. I know.
In order to get some movement, you know, decisions made, for, I think we're gonna be here for today. Because there's a lot of things that need to be changed here based on what I've heard. I like the idea of something that's grandfathered, you know, it's already existing, that has more liberal allowances than something newly constructed. I can see, because now this is the new, these are the regulations, you know, going into that, but for grandfather, you know, I like your idea of not having such strict requirements on grandfather structures being turned into a attainable or affordable. But I need to kind of pull this together with all the comments or town planner does, or somebody does, in order for consensus to be built. I'm not sure, how do we do that here?
It's a good question.
Well, Chris, a lot of- Like you said earlier that, you know, your attention was strictly on affordable and, well, not strictly, I'm sorry, was focused on affordable and attainable is 513. I think affordable is 406.
405.
I think with the 513, I think we're sussing out exactly how we want that to change. I don't think there's an affordable clause to put in this section. It doesn't belong there.
So you don't want to 513 into attainable and affordable.
I don't think.
That's how you're.
No, I think you should come up with a new section. And maybe don't put a number on it yet, because you don't know if it's gonna be permitted or allowed by special use permit, but kind of outline what you would like
The goals are.
the goals, and so that you know, then the board and the town council can figure out where to put that section.
But that, what Chris is talking about, a 513 could qualify for that part.
Right, you could take parts of 513 and parts of 405, put them together
I
and
don't think it's
create.
hard to make a XYZ ordinance
Yeah.
for your consideration. I'm just worried about the mechanics of doing under the structure that we're working right now with this, you know, agenda item. Do I pull it back, redo it? And would that be what you would do, or would you just want to keep working with 513 and let me come back with XYZ, which is affordable?
I think the first thing would be to extend that time frame of 45 days
Yeah.
so that you can,
That's a straight right
because
down.
they have, that's the ordinance where they have to act within the 45 days.
Right.
Um,
How do
so
I do that? Do I write a letter?
Yeah.
I would write a letter to the town clerk, Yeah.
Okay.
but you can also tell the planning board so that they,
I
No.
think 2 more hearings, 2 more months would be a limit. I think that we could solve a lot within that time. Let's say 513 is what you're doing now for accessory.
so say like July 15th or
Yeah,
something.
and then next one we work on is just affordable. Folks are making movement on attainable. And then, you know, the third meeting would be just to see if we have a whole organized and consistent. I'm looking forward to that.
For the 513, I'm interested in discussing the bonus percentage, that the size of an actual 513 allowable size, increasing that from 2 bedrooms to something else. The incentive, the grandfather versus new structure, I think is another discussion, or part of our discussion. So those are kind of the 3 top things that I want to get sussed out.
Anybody else tell me what they would like, sorry?
Yeah.
I can just make sure. don't
Can I-
forget something.
Can I just mention one thing? I have seen a few building permit applications that have come in that have 513 apartments. Say it's a 3-car garage and the second floor is going to be the 513 and 3/4 of it is the apartment, and then there's this storage room because the 1,200 square feet is, and there's nothing you can do. You have to approve it because technically it says storage.
Well, that's great. Renters get a storage space.
But
How valuable is that?
so when you're thinking about the existing structures versus new structures, keep that in mind. So
Wait on.
Well, I would
Maybe-
love to throw a wrench into the sea here and discuss briefly, or the idea, I still think people should consider having an owner be their own 513, if they were going to be restricted to being in the 513 year round. And it was always an accessory. And so that ownership cannot change. They can't turn it into condominium and sell it. But if an owner lives here and is struggling to maintain and own their property and would, their little 513 would better suit them, let them be their own 513 and do as they wish with their main house, rent it weekly in the summer. But they wouldn't be able to move back into it in the winter. They stay in that. Or maybe they'd rent their main house year round. Let them make those options themselves. I'm just not sure that is a devil in disguise. I think it should be thought about.
Is that too much for
This,
this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that,
Sorry.
Next round.
That's right. No, I did, I'm trying to.
If we want to move this forward, we
I don't
need to focus on one or two things and do them well and move forward.
The two things that I am the clearest on, and I've got 10 of them, but the two are most clear, is to allow for more than 1,200 square feet for the 3 bedrooms, and to allow 3 units, up to 3 units on a property that already has a house. But if there's no house, then allow 4 units, but that switches it to affordable density.
Okay, good.
Well, that relates to what I was gonna say. You have an item here about exceeding lot coverage by 133%.
That's okay.
Owned by the town, right?
That's,
Yeah, so I think the town has already set. Right, as their, didn't we just review the town's request for 4 units?
yes,
On a lot.
That's your town owned lot, correct?
Yeah.
it's for a town-owned lot for year-round and employed by the town.
And we approved 4 units, correct?
Right, so that would be 5 units per lot, because you'd have a single-family dwelling and 4 513s for town-owned.
That
But you could take that model and apply it to Service Commercial, Old Harbor Commercial, New Harbor Commercial, whatever, RC, wherever.
There's one thing we haven't discussed, I think it's, we're discussing before, in this agenda item, and that is when commercial entities take housing away, year-round housing away from people, more seasonal housing, and that's the issue it has very recently. I don't know, I would like to discuss the concept of the commercial entity building in some ratio. I think 1 to 3, for every 3 they create for their own employee, they should create one for the community. I don't know.
That's a good idea.
Later in this, and I feel pretty strongly, especially after what just happened on the road, that there's a lot of money out there. Buying houses apparently is not a problem for them, and it's for seasonal occupancy. It's taking away year-round occupancy, and I think they need to ante up for. I had that written in.
Good idea.
Zoning, right? and what you have to-
No, so I think you could do that if you looked at, say, Service Commercial and you wanted to allow more than, you wanted to possibly allow 4 units, you could write it so that it's 4 for their staff, whoever they would like to put in there, and 1 for the communities year round, or you could say it has to be year round and not for seasonal
So
housing.
Just like any housing project, right, that has a certain percentage of affordable housing.
I mean, I understand the concept, but I don't know the mechanism. Like, if somebody buys a home in a residential zone and they want to use it for seasonal housing, is there anything to prevent that? No.
If they buy a home in a residential zone, like RA,
Sure.
and they can rent 2 rooms.
To their employees.
Yeah.
But,
They can rent the whole house.
So you're,
well, this is kind of what I'm getting at. is
Yeah.
Right now, you have homeowners that have second, third homes and they're renting it by the week. What's the difference with a commercial entity coming in and renting it to their employees for the summer?
That's a good point.
Okay, like, you know, you wanna go down that road, you're gonna have to take Newport's model where they just took entire zones and said no rentals by the week. And that would include employees. You know, I understand what Chris is saying,
Right.
but I think the mechanisms aren't something that we really want. I can understand, like, when you're buying something existing, the mechanisms, I don't think are something we want to entertain, but when you're building something new, I think some of those mechanisms can be put in. Meaning, if you're gonna purchase a piece of property or an existing piece of property in a commercial zone, and you want to add on employee housing, a 4-to-1 ratio might be considered or something.
That's where I think we should be.
That's what I think Chris said, commercial. That's what I thought.
Is Old Town Road commercial?
Some of
I'm only-
it,
that's-
RB, some of it is, it's RB.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so this is the other,
but you don't know if those.
the commercial entities, you know, a lot of these homes aren't actually being, they're purchased by individuals, but if you look at the paperwork, it's a corporation.
And yet an individual can act
Right, right. Although I agree with what you're saying, is that's what I tried to say the other night was, we have, you know, we've done a really good job at keeping chains businesses off the island, but we have 3 now.
So let me work that down. I'll think about this. Because you're right.
So-
This is not easy, before easy could have already solved the problem.
Correct.
So,
Chris, I honestly think you're being optimistic that we will solve this in 3 more months. I'm sorry.
Well,
okay,
the first start, first step.
There was one more thing that I wanted to add to your thinking list. Why couldn't we use existing town buildings such as the Coast Guard building, police station, and the town hall, and retrofit them for 513s? I bet you if you look at the roof space, that some of those roofs can either be lifted or expanded.
Like the Oregon Coast Guard house.
I don't know if that needs to be written into an ordinance, but the town should be able to do that.
So that's a policy that I've advocated for when Old Harbor was done. I begged and pleaded to put 2 apartments for staff above the old dock master's office, and it got unequivocally shut down.
I remember that.
And
the school.
it's just, you know, the school, the school's another entity, the Coast Guard station, I think I mentioned.
We worked on that.
Keeps the- That's the next,
It's a big barn.
that's a
But we have an
third
advisory
ordinance or
board.
the second
We
floor
are
that.
an advisory board. We can make that suggestion.
When we installed a solar electric system at the center, the attic space up there is tremendous. I've been after them for years to use that for their.
Their new design is coming online. We've already seen it here, ready for it. So they will have a combination more offices and housing.
But this is a space that's not being used and it's huge. So I got a communication from Ray Torrey, the architect, saying a lot of reasons why not to do that. And I said, well, maybe you should consider making those 513s, because you can put 4 513s above the medical center. It's incredible how big that space is. So to your point, it's will. That is needed.
Before we go on to another topic, is there anything the audience would like to add that for Chris to think about or for the board to think about? Now it's your golden opportunity. Which one of you would like to have done?
I'm not sure where you're leaving it now, if you're going to take the existing 513 and make a few modifications. And Chris is gonna develop one with income and that'd be a separate section, or if you're gonna move income into the 513. You move, if Chris's was adopted as this said, then every accessory apartment now would continue to exist because it's grandfathered. There'll be no income requirements on the ones that exist. You have no change on those. If you start putting income limits on accessory apartments, there's a big problem with that. You got to certify it. What if I have somebody who renting an apartment, and been there for 5 years, you get a raise, I'm sorry, I gotta kick you out. You make too much money, you're on the street again. Or what if they decide to rent a second bedroom, and am I adding 2 people now to the income limit? Or what if it's 2 couples, and now you have 4 people's income in that apartment? I'm sorry, I'm kicking you out. So you have unintended consequences if you start putting income limits on these accessory apartments. Because people are gonna get to a certain point, and if they start making too much, or if they have a partner, they could get themselves kicked out because of this. So I'd be very careful with that, very careful, because you put people in a bad spot. Gee, I own 2 businesses, I could buy a third one, make more money, but I'm gonna lose my housing. So, just be careful with that. Because it's not like, affordable housing, the housing board does. Once you're in, you're not audited every year. And again, is this information public? So,
Okay, good thoughts. Thank you.
So keeping 513 attainable is the direction that
Yeah.
you're,
So I understood that was
Okay.
our intent, but there was,
Yes, in fact, one of those houses for those people, so that's would be under the attainable section. And then you have income restrictions that would go under your affordable section. Sandy, I think your hand was up.
but there was also incentivization under the affordable section, that's not in attainable.
That's what I would say.
Yeah,
Yes.
Jen, can I just say a couple?
Cindy Pappas. Just as a recap, reiterating what Doug said, I think that, and I could be 2 steps behind it, but I do see 513 ordinance being tweaked. And then what Chris is talking about, affordability issues, a separate issue altogether. And the beauty of 513 is that we have 53 units, 53 units that were independently conceived and constructed with no cost to the town, no real ongoing oversight from the town, and have created, wonderful living situations for 53 units. And I think that it really behooves the town to find ways to tweak that. I think you're on the right direction, to encourage people that own homes out there to create those 513s, because that's one of the easiest, low overhead opportunities for our town to have more housing, and create it quickly. So finding ways to make it more attractive for homeowners to create those units on their property is a real good direction to be examined.
I think if you make a couple tweaks and then put a blitz in the newspaper explaining what a 513 is and explain to people. A lot of people don't know what a 513 is, and they may be amenable to that if they knew what it was and knew what the restrictions were, what they were allowed to do. So I think advertising, once this is settled, the 513 could gain you some more units.
Good point. All right.
and we could send something out to property owners. You could put something on the bulletin board. I mean, you could definitely educate.
Yeah, last time they were confused because you made that suggestion earlier at an earlier meeting and they thought it was a survey.
Well, part of it,
You know.
yeah, part of the idea was a survey to find out just what we've talked about tonight. Okay, well, if you're thinking about a 513, what are some of the obstacles that you're experiencing? I mean, I'm giving you feedback based on people who call or come in and talk to me about them, but we don't know, all of them.
So Allison, will you make a list of the few things that we need to tweak on the 513 so that we can move forward on this while Chris works on creating something for affordable housing, which we would not be putting forward at this point.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was trying to jump in there. So the process, I'm trying to listen as best I can. So Chris is going to continue potentially drafting a different section focused on deed restricted 513 type housing units. Margie, you're saying that the planning board will focus internally. You want myself, Bill, whoever, to draft up amendments to our current section 513.
Yeah, using Chris's suggestions, some of the little comments that we've made here, and then we could use this as a, either for the next meeting, or just 2 days, because you probably won't get to it, but the next time we get together, we can take a look at it and start looking and improving the tweaks or tweaking the tweaks, whatever works.
So we'll continue.
Forward to
Yeah.
town council.
So are we responding to the amendments from, like, is that process, as far as asking for an extension? I mean, it seems like it's going to be completely changed and an overhaul from the applicant. So is that something,
So
I guess
Chris,
just
you want to-
procedurally, I have some questions, and so we're gonna stay on separate, kind of, the planning board is gonna continue with their work related to making section 513 more flexible, and we'll incorporate some of the ideas from tonight that were raised, and we will draft those. And then we'll wait for Chris to come back with a different version of potential amendments.
Exactly.
Okay,
So that's the way we can move at least one section forward, and try to get that done, and then be ready for Chris when he comes back with the restricted ideas for 513, or some other section, however we choose to name it and do it.
okay. So for the June meeting, we'll have some minor modifications, potential amendments to section 513 drafted related
Can
to.
either, agree with, change, move forward, whatever. We will be meeting again on Wednesday, 513 is on the agenda.
So do you think that I could just make a quick list of some of the things that you talked about tonight? So
I
at
think
least
it'd be
you
great.
could make some decision
Yeah,
on
that might give
like
Allison.
5 things.
Yeah,
and
why don't
then
you do that. That
rather,
would be great. I'm trying to
Okay.
figure out what we can do that'll make it easier for Allison to write this up. Because I know it's hard to hear using just a computer.
well, I'll make a list for Wednesday
Yeah.
and
Then
you
we
can,
we can tweak it a
read
little bit
through
on
it.
Wednesday. That will give her better ideas of how
Okay.
to rewrite the material over the next couple of weeks. Does that seem to work for everybody? Because this has been, we've kind of been all over the board here. And that's part of the process, but it's hard to follow if you're not here in the room. That's what I was.
and I think Mary and Gail will not be here on Wednesday. So I'll make the list and I'll email it to you and you can let me know.
Yeah, send back comments.
Yes, no
to Jen, and she can
comments.
share them with us. Okay.
It's-
And Mary, I already talked about that earlier, so that's fine.
And do we also need to respond to the town council in the near future, like this month, in regards to what was sent over?
Well,
Who's
Chris
part-
is going to extend the time until July, August, something. Okay, so then I guess you could,
Next question, comment?
Just a really quick,
Fine, this is the time.
I just wanted to speak in support of the 2 points that Gail made about, definitely about expanding or taking the restrictions off of the 513, if you're operating within the parameters of what you're allowed to do, right? And also points you made about the owner being in 513 and renting the house out year round. Like in my situation, I can build a 3,000 square foot footprint, but I'm just one adult and 2 kids, and I just want a little tiny house. But maybe I want to rent a 513 to a family of 2 adults and 3 kids. So you either have to let me build a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom for them, but have me in a tiny house, or let me live in the 513 and put them in the house. Okay? So there's got to be just in support of more flexibility.
A live example.
Just going, sorry, going along the same lines as Catherine in support of what Gail was saying, that's been saying. I feel like there's gotta be some sort of formula that we come up with where, yes, have more square footage available for a 513. You obviously don't want to be bigger probably than the main structure, or like Catherine was saying, have a percentage of, as long as it fits within its lot lines and buffer zones and whatnot, and density coverage. Just, you don't want a giant structure and then one tiny house and then another tiny house somewhere else. There's gotta be some sort of formula that we come up with there. And along those lines, I'm in the process of having a 513 design for myself. And when I met with our architect last week, she just kept saying, it's very small. Just remember, it's very small and it's functional. And I live in a 513 now, which is highly functional, but you can do 1,200 square feet on one level, if it's, that's what we're trying to do, that's what fits within our buffer zones. We could have a 1,200 square foot basement, and that's not really taking over that density, but that is an unusable space that with flexibility on square footage could be enhanced and used as a rental apartment or as an extra bedroom, if there's an in-law apartment. There's just, with more square footage to work with, in a controlled first, way of some sort. I think it's something to look at because 1,200 square feet livable, absolutely. 700 square feet, like Doug was saying, totally livable as well. But it's nice to not have that exact limitation, and 2 bedrooms is not always useful for people. Jen and I have had this conversation as well with projects in the past, and I commend what you guys are doing and all the work Chris and Alicia have been putting into it, everybody really. But I think this is a great conversation. Today was a really positive meeting and think moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We don't often get compliments. We really enjoy it. One last chance. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much, Chris. Thanks for all your work, and thank you everybody else for coming to support and share our ideas with us. And don't go away. Keep in touch. We want to hear what you think about the changes that will come down the road in the next several weeks. You're welcome to stay for the discussion on the large houses, but you're also welcome to speak out the door. I'm just everybody stretch for 1 minute.
Thank you. Should we talk about 513?
Yes.
No, you have hearings first.
We have hearings, so I can't tell you exactly what time, but I'm sorry.
Get 2 or 3 that might take an hour.
At
It won't be-
least.
It won't be a 4.
No, well, not before, that I can guarantee.
No.
Beyond that, I can't specify, because I'm never quite sure how long. You've been on enough committees for me to know that.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
I would say 5:30.
I'm not promising. This is
Yeah.
Somebody who's gonna show up, it'll come earlier, it'll change, so. Or somebody can ask me, wow, this is that, sorry, I mean, it's very cool. And I do understand where it's coming from, yeah, I gotta take off work. Okay. All right. We're going back down to number 1, discuss the results of the large house survey, discussion regarding amendments to zoning regulations related to the size and massing of residential structures, zoning ordinance section 406, residential structure meeting certain thresholds, section 514, residential structures of the RA and the RB zone, section 11, general prohibitions, and section 306E and 307E. Okay, Allison, can you hear us?
Yep.
All right. You want to talk a little bit about the large house survey and kind of bring us up to date? It's been several months since we've been involved with this for various and good reasons.
Yes, I know. It's been busy. So it's been a few months. Last year, if you recall, the town council adopted some amendments to sections 111 and 514 that the planning board had proposed. And that was focused on a reduction in those prohibited levels for the size of individual residential structures. So the 80,000 went down to 65,000 cubic feet for building volume. Living floor area maximum was added, 4,500 square feet established as a new absolute maximum. And then the footprint size, 5,000 square feet, the planning board had determined that that was too large. And so it was reduced to 3,500 square feet for the maximum. So those amendments were adopted last year, but a sunset clause was added to it that those amendments will revert back to what was originally within the ordinance that expires January 2nd of next year. So there had been some other discussions the planning board had last year about other potential revisions to these several sections of the zoning ordinance related to the size of residential structures, and that were beyond just the maximum sizes relating to how it could be structured that the planning board wanted to explore. So we have a list of those potential, phase 2 I was referring to as different approaches that the planning board could incorporate into the ordinance. Like, for example, one was related to having a relationship between allowed living space to lot size. So the greater the lot size, the town would allow a larger maximum house size on that property. So coming up with, an appropriate ratio there. There had been some discussion relating to whether or not a total maximum living area of all residential structures on a property should be established. Currently, there is not one. The limiting of number of residential accessory structures, this has been brought up actually tonight, but that is outside of this section of the zoning ordinance, but something that is obviously related. And the zoning districts, so that's something that was also discussed, which zoning districts these regulations should apply to, and expanding that seems to be something that's supported. So there was, I can continue walking through these, but we had put out the large house survey and we had a lot of responses. There were over 200 people that provided their opinions on the current regulations and potential amendments to those. At least 70% that responded did generally support regulating the size of residential structures on the island. And so as we walk through potential changes tonight to see if we can find some consensus from the planning board members on certain areas you'd like to amend, we can refer to the survey results if you want to see, where there were some, what the responses were and percentages. If you want to, I can pull those up as we go through the conversation. But I think tonight we could try to focus on, areas where there is a consensus. If you want to provide direction as to, I could try to start drafting up specific language for you to consider.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody have questions before we start going through this? Okay. Allison, where do you want to start?
The biggest change would be, and we've already discussed, I guess we've already done the phase 1 with the size of the different maximums. But a general, I guess the biggest change would be probably that lot size. If you want to have varying maximums based on lot size, because that would be a significant departure to what is currently the regulations, and that would require some additional decisions on maximums, various levels. So I don't know if that's how you want to handle it, Margie, kind of walk through each of those questions and see if there's consensus on that.
Sure.
So having that tiered approach, I mean, right now we have, there's somewhat of a tiered approach where you have the regulations call for, there's a maximum that above which you could apply for a special use permit, and there's that absolute maximum. So there's, you know, the by right, we have the table of what sizes are allowed by right of the different dimensions, and then you have that range where you would apply for a special use permit, and then you have the absolute maximum that it's just not allowed at all. So that's the current way the ordinances work together, the different sections. But it's come up several times about whether or not a larger maximum on a larger lot size should or should not be allowed, and that a smaller maximum on smaller lot sizes. So I think getting that, I guess, determination by the board, if that's something you want to draft up to review, or that approach, or is there another approach that would, I guess, having the general conversation too, like what is the current, what do planning board members feel is not working with the current ordinance? You know, what do you feel, how can it be improved, or should it be improved? You know, if any members want to make a recommendation, and then we can try to come up with a solution.
Can I have a clarification on just individual structure dimensions versus lot size? I think on the second page of your memo, Allison, under phase 2, establish a relationship between allowable living space to lot size. And the examples are what you put were, it's 4,000 square feet for a lot greater than 3 acres, but less than 6 acres. And 4,500 square feet for lots greater than 6 acres with a maximum of 5,000 square feet. Now, playing the devil's advocate, if I have 6 acres, why can't I subdivide it and get 2 homes out of it? I guess I'm kind of wondering what the end game is for the planning board with pursuing this. I know, I have a feeling I know why it came up, but my largest concern isn't necessarily square foot of living area. It's there's a ratio between size of a home and height. Okay, that's to have a whatever you say you have 6 acres. What is the maximum size house that you have?
Right now?
Yeah.
Are you talking about building lot coverage, or are you talking
Lot
about,
coverage for 6 acres.
well, you could have 3% of 6 acres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not necessarily, because
But-
you're gonna fall into the 2,000 square foot threshold if you have 6 acres.
But you're saying just for coverage right now. 7,000 or 7,840 square feet
Right. So
footprint.
footprint.
Yeah.
So if I just subdivide that into 2 3-acre lots, if I'm reading this right, I can get 8,000.
Well, you might not be able, it depends if you can subdivide. I mean, so not all properties,
Well, I don't want to see.
I see what you're saying.
I want to see,
Can I ask? a
yeah.
question? I think the idea is that having one large structure on like basically a double size lot, which is a pretty large size, but still limited, or versus having 2 smaller structures. Those 2 lots, very exciting, because if you subdivide it, it's going to be
I-
smaller house.
Well, they're going to be smaller than the one,
Yeah.
but the
smaller
square,
than
the coverage is going to be more.
Mm.
Because because the way this is tiered,
No, because it's maxed out at 5,000,
if you have 6 acres.
Yeah.
What if you have 3?
then it's maxed out at.
4 per lot.
Yeah.
So now I have 8 if I subdivide.
I see what you're saying, and then.
And this
it's
is-
a one house. It's not
Yeah, see,
eight
we're-
or 2 houses.
And that's
So
what,
that means we should adjust it down.
if I had 6 acres, I would do that. I'm just saying, like, so. And my concern isn't necessarily, like I said earlier, the size of the structure, it's the height, you know, like.
I understand that your land, they got these, you've got wetlands, and so forth, that may all be taken away, the 6 acres. You may find that with removing that, you're down to 4.5 acres.
Well,
There are
I'm
other.
just playing devil's advocate.
I understand, I'm
with
just saying
these
there are
large
things
homes.
that come into play when they actually.
And I don't know how much it comes up, but we did see that,
Yeah.
because that thing that's in the hallway and the number of like the different size homes, because I'm trying to wrap my head around how many 6,000 square foot homes we have. What is
Is
it?
that, I have a fundamental misunderstanding of that. Do you, when saying, okay, you can do 3% of your lot size, do you subtract wetlands before you apply that?
No,
Okay, so that,
you subtract your right of way for, if you have an easement for access
So
from your total lot area.
I think the question asked, specifically asked, how many lots is this gonna, like, what are we spending our time trying to circumvent and how likely is it gonna happen? And then when I look at this after what we just discussed, this is kind of counteracting, expanding,
Yeah, but wait a minute.
allowing more 513s unless there's a provision to allow that.
Potential,
With these changes.
but the potential is still unlimited theoretically. If houses get demolished and people buy up more than one building lot, they can still use whatever is allowed. What I'd like to also add to your comment is I'd hate to see a house go up. Let's say somebody has 6 acres. They build a large house on the first 3 acres, claiming, well, I have 6 acres. But once the house is built, they then subdivide and sell the other third. So for me, if lot size is to be included, which I'm open to, it has to be deed restricted, so it cannot be subdivided afterwards.
That's already taken care of by zoning.
Why don't you just
That's
set,
already covered in zoning. You can't build a bigger house. Oh, I see what you're saying. If you have 6,000 square feet, in my opinion, I mean, Norris Pike was so deeply involved in all this when we went from 4% to 3% and 1%. And as a builder, he had such great expertise and spoke so well about how to educate people on what happens when you build, when you restrict sizes and roof lines and what happens with architecture when you do all that. And I can't begin to recite all he recited, but percentages were really big to him and they make sense. I think absolutes are very challenging because you push people into places where they may not want to be. I mean, people want a certain amount of square footage. They have a lot with a topography that may not make sense to go tall. They need to spread out. You give them an absolute and they can't do that. But they've already owned their land or they bought it when it was a 3%, 1% rule. Now we've got a 2,000 square foot rule. So, okay, I'm just going to build a box. I'm going to because there's no architectural review. And I know I've said all this before, but I feel like I have to reiterate that absolutes can be very problematic because we don't have any leeway. If there's the topography of the land is as such where you really want to be able to spread your house out. I've said this before, just walking from Bean Point, looking out over Andy's Way, there's a lot of low-lying houses. They definitely exceed the 2,000 square foot threshold, and they definitely probably exceed the cubic square feet or what have you, because they're cathedral ceilings, because they're all one level. And I just wonder if that's where absolutes cause a problem, where, you know, they don't want to go up high, they don't want to be up into the wind, their view is already dramatic and spectacular, so they want to spread out, but we're gonna have to say, sorry, you can't do that.
I think we
Well,
can
they
have
have
it
a
out
special use permit.
Yeah.
What's that?
It allows them to come to us to, so it allows us that. flexibility.
Right, and I realize that with the 2,000 square foot threshold, but not with the other maximum, the absolutes that we're putting, and with the discussion of maybe making that 2,000 less, or I also have, it confuses me as to, with the lot sizes, how we come up with 4,000 and 4,500. The 500 doesn't coincide with the amount of acreage. I don't have that language in front of me, unfortunately.
And I
just wonder how these
bring
numbers
that-
are obtained.
I bring that specific lot coverage versus square foot, that tiered aspect, I was like, honestly, I didn't tiered,
Are you talking about the prohibited?
tiered in more respect to height, because which would you prefer? Would you prefer a tall box, because that's what that lot topography encourages? Or would you allow flexibility and do something more of a ranch style spread out as the you know, concession? And, you know, I don't like the big tall homes anymore. You know, it just doesn't, it's not appealing. It's like you said, all the water. And there are people that have built homes,
And that's what
and they
inspired.
could have
the-
gone 35.
Right,
you know,
and that's
whatever,
what inspired the 35.
But they chose
32.
not to.
32.
It was 35, and that's what inspired that change when the 3%, 4%.
So I guess what I'm saying is that someone had a lot by these standards or whatever standard they come up with, that was like, let's just say they could build a 2,000 square foot box or 2,800, 3,000 square foot ranch, which would be, or 2,500 square foot.
That's on the lay of the land.
Right. And is that flexibility other than special use permit allowed? Is that, can we allow that flexibility without?
Isn't there the option to go, if they're exceeding the 2,000, to go with
They could,
wide, low and wide?
well, they could, it depends on which threshold they're exceeding. If there's like permitted by right, then there's permitted by a special use permit, and then there's the prohibited. So anything that's,
So,
Yeah.
right,
yes.
right now, it's 3,500 for the absolute maximum for building footprint. So, but the building, so is that a concern, or is it more that 2,000 square foot building footprint that triggers the special use permit? Because, or a single level, like,
I don't
is,
have as much concern with the 2,000 square foot threshold. It's because that requires a special use permit. So we get to
Yeah.
view the property and the land and the whole application. But it's the absolutes that we can't review, that 3,500 square foot absolute, the
The prohibited.
4,000 versus 4,500, the cubic square feet absolutes. It's any absolute. I'm not an absolute kind of. Absolutes just put me on the defense as to why, what inspires it, what does it accomplish? Those are answers I don't have to some of these numbers that we're placing as absolutes.
Well, that gets us to the survey.
Well-
The answers is what the community would like to see, the vision of the community. And we had 233 people respond. You know, there were 16 people that talked about square foot lot size, regulating building size, so that's a small percentage. You know, but I looked at the numbers and, you know, they had the maximum size, the average number that people felt comfortable with was 4,320 feet. And square feet, but then if you break out what I call the special groups, you know, realtors and builders and conservation people, you know, then it's 4,272, and that number is driven, you know, as you would expect. The builders would like to see something actually in that range, and conservation people a little bit less, and it's the real estate people who are advocating for the 5,400 square feet as a maximum. So I think that's.
How many realtors responded out of the?
16, and it's about the same for builders and conservation people. So I think that that's what we're here to represent the entire community. And then we have 200 something people saying they want something 4,200 square feet. And that's pretty clear information.
And is 235 considered a qualified number for out of what, are there 1,500 homes?
We asked that question already.
Yeah, there's
Do we?
15.
Yeah, we don't
But
know.
it could be, it might not be all homeowners. It might be people who use this ordinance. It could be an architect that doesn't even really live, like, doesn't live on Block Island, but maybe designs for homes on Block Island.
Gotcha.
And because sometimes people might have a hard time understanding what this ordinance really says, or how to apply it, or all of those
And I
things.
understand having absolutes, like, I understand it, I don't necessarily think you should have absolutes, but what I want to encourage, again, are the unintended consequences. And, you know, if you give them an absolute on a specific size lot, but that lot can actually fit double that or close to it, if it was split in half and it's, and look at that, it can split it in half. Those are the types of things that I don't want to see necessarily happen. And I also don't want to hinder the 513, because we're talking about.
Well, you can still, I think that you should note that you can still have your coverage. So this is just for the individual structures.
Okay.
Like, so say you have a single family dwelling and 12 accessory structures, whether it's 513 sheds, garage, accessory residential structures. We don't have a limit on those. You could still have the main structure that complies with the zoning ordinance and have additional structures, because that's 4% for the entire lot in the RA zone. So
And I
you're
do
not,
like some limits, because people will push and push and push if there are not some absolute limits that they can't go beyond. And we want to make sure that we don't end up with houses that are absolutely huge on property that, while large, it would be overwhelming and not fit into the character of the neighborhood. So it's more than just the lot size we're looking at, we're also looking at character of the neighborhood and how can we protect the people living in the area. So there are lots of things to look at. So a few absolutes are going to be absolutely necessary. Sorry, I couldn't read the slide. Yeah, Mark, I saw you hand up.
Mark Emanuel. Let me expand on what Gail, Chris, and now Margie just said with two examples. And I'm going to start selfishly with my house, because it's 1 acre and it's maxed out as far as density. I don't want to go up a second story. I don't like the look of it. I think it would stick out. And believe it or not, this little burger would become a large house in appearance. I prefer to go out and keep it a range, but I can't because I'm over the lot line coverage. Now, a better example is the house next to Micah Oppenheimer's across from the West Side Baptist Church. That was a burger, smaller than mine, with those dramatic views you talked about, where a second story was totally unnecessary to achieve that magnificent view. They could have kept it at the same level, but because of restrictions, they weren't allowed to go out, but to go up, destroying what you just said, these views, especially to the butter, Michael Oppenheimer and others. So I don't know if there's a mechanism now to allow more density if you stay down lower, like would work for me, again selfishly, or would have worked for the butter to Mr. Oppenheimer.
well, the way it is right now, you could go, you could exceed 45 feet of a wall plane as long as you have varying roof heights. So there is a way to expand, like your house, for example, without being in the prohibited category.
Well,
Does that
yeah,
make
so
sense?
if he's maxed out, it's a lot.
He's back on his lot coverage.
Oh, I thought you were talking about your dwelling expanding. It's your coverage that you're, okay.
And that's what I was speaking to a little earlier is
Well, that's a,
a tier not specific to necessarily the acreage, but a tier to the actual size of the living space. Where I would rather see 6,000 or 7,000 square foot living space that was all less than 25 feet, as opposed to 5,000 square foot, that's 32 feet.
I can see incentivizing, you know,
He's
homes
not.
buildings in some way.
How about this one?
How about
All standard homes for standard lots, period. Special use permit for larger footprints on larger lots. Deed restricted, so subdivision cannot take advantage of that. And flexibility with footprint and building heights and kind of ratio.
Deed restrictions are a civil matter, aren't they?
yeah, I don't think we should start deed
Deed restrictions are typically a civil matter. Bill could weigh in on that as to whether the town.
Yeah, you don't need to go there. We can't impose deed restrictions anyway by zoning.
right, like I, well, I mean, you already have something under lot building coverage that has, if your lot size is a substandard lot, you're allowed a higher percentage. There's already there's already a section of the zoning ordinance under 306. Like for Mark's, he could have 1,300 square feet of coverage. I don't think, I mean, maybe his house is, that footprint is larger than that, but I don't think so.
But clearly, the survey that we got indicated people's desire for lot size being a determining factor in house size. And if I cannot prevent somebody from subdividing after they just built this big house, then I don't feel safe having lot size as a guideline.
Well, Bill, would it be they would be non-conforming and need to go through the zoning process if they were to subdivide and they exceeded,
The original lots.
yeah, the original lot size?
They maxed it out.
I mean, potentially.
I don't know that you can mix up the ability to subdivide. I'm not sure what that question was. If you exceeded the amount that's required.
For a 3-acre lot.
So
For
if
a
you have a
3-acre lot.
6, right, if the lot is 6 acres and you build a house based on 6 acres because
5,000 square feet for that.
for 5,000 square feet, for example, and 3 acres would only allow 2,000 square feet for, okay, then,
Maybe 260.
This is what I'm saying.
yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, that's, yeah, if you've well, that would automatically preclude a subdivision because you would be creating a non-conforming lot of record if you created 2 lots that are already over the existing lot coverage. It would be like you can't subdivide a lot if you're gonna end up being over a setback or something like that, or creating some other kind of lot coverage issue or whatever. So that would kind of take care of itself.
It'd be inconsistent with zoning, right? So you would.
Yeah,
be
you
able to
can't
prove
create,
it.
every time a new lot is created, the planning board has to make a finding that the subdivision is consistent with the provisions of the zoning ordinance.
But with that example.
You could still go to zoning.
With that example, someone could build a 4,000 square foot home on the 6 acres. And then subdivide it at a later date to 3 and 3, still fall within the lot.
Yeah, you can do that.
Without it, it's just.
I think 4,000 is in the rural.
Okay.
I focus more on percentages because of scale, and acreage because of scale. Because a large house, everyone has their own definition of what a large house is, but when someone is investing in their vacation home anywhere in the world, they have parameters, maybe mentally in their mind, what they would like to accomplish. And today, especially, everyone wants family compounds. They want spaces for expanded family, and everyone has a different definition of what is large. And I think getting back to scale, you have 6 acres, a 5,000 square foot house looks entirely different than it does on 2 acres. And the effect on the neighborhood is entirely different. But I don't know if that solved anything.
Well,
Just thinking out loud.
what's everybody's opinion on conceding footprint versus height? Because,
And we still have
I mean, we don't encourage, how do we encourage low-lying structures right now?
We did with the change to 35 to 32, and Norris was reluctant.
Like, that's.
But the reason that Norris was reluctant to go much lower than that, if I remember correctly, is because they knew roof lines, roof pitches, and how bad the architecture can look. The pitches are
They
too
start doing
shallow.
flat roofs like this.
Shallow.
Yeah, very shallow roofs. And he made a very convincing argument, for it.
Depending on the structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things we want to make sure we take, Allison takes a look at, the one from her memo that's dated November 3rd of last year. She talks about the percentage in Barclays Vineyard they use, that it, with a certain size house, a certain size lot, you can have a certain size house. If it's smaller, you get a lot smaller, you get a smaller house. If it's a lot, as large, you get large. There's a baseline, and then you can go up or down. I'd love to explore that a little bit more on how it would work on Block Island. We want to make very certain that we keep our house sizes appropriate for our neighborhoods throughout the island. I've been told by I don't know how many people, we don't want to be the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard and so forth, that we want to keep the unique character of Block Island. So we want to figure out how we can allow people to have their dream home and yet keep it within the parameters of for a compound or a, anyway, we want to make sure the character of Block Island is maintained. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
I love that idea too, and I thought.
I love that can be like juggled to fit some of our needs.
Yeah.
Because we all agree that a house that's going on 10 acres could be a lot different than a house that's going on 2 acres. And yes, we have to make sure that they then don't get divided up into 3 other places, lots for building purposes. But a lot of people will want a large area and want a compound, and maybe this is some way we can do it by coverage. So anyway, I like this Martha's Vineyard idea. I've explored a little bit more.
Was that for total building coverage or just some?
It's, for new building projects, so it's projects. But if you have more acreage, your coverage goes up. If you have less acreage, your coverage goes down.
That's how we've always been.
But I like how it works for Block Island. I can see how it might work for Barclays Vineyard, but which allows larger houses and so forth than we do. It's something to explore. So.
That's true. I'm not advocating for massive homes because of my occupation. I'm just trying to think about every aspect of what we see and want to see. And I think personally, architecture has far greater impact than size. And what I find unfortunate is tearing old houses down and building new ones that don't look anything like the old architecture. And that to me is changing the face of Block Island more than anything.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
That's what I tell you about the character of the neighborhood. Yeah. And there are a number of things that go with that.
But to that example, Dale, like you tear down, Long use your house, for example. You tear yours down, and because of the existing configuration, that person is most likely gonna go up 32 feet. And if they have the option of just with the existing lot coverage in your house as it sits, you can go up, right? You can go up now, am I right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was just trying to figure out.
Want to
the-
see that, and I'm
clerk
asking Dale as far as character architecture. Would you prefer to see a house go up, or would you rather see another wing be added that's the same height?
I would rather,
Or
I think.
combination
all-
of both?
Yeah, combination, because architecture is what, to me, is the important factor here in keeping the face of Block Island. And, you know, and you, when you have, say, the breakers, that's probably higher than 35 feet. They probably never be able to do that again, or they could because they stayed, they didn't tear the house down. If they tore the house down, would they be able to make it as tall as it is today? But would we want to see the breakers shorter? You know, just as an example, or so in a height example. But like the little slaughterhouse next to Mary's on West Side Road was just torn down. The homestead's being torn down on Cornet. I'm sure the little red house that Mid Holloway owned for so many years is going to be torn down at some point. And there was a super contemporary house built, cool looking place, but behind it doesn't look anything like the little red house on Clayton Trail.
Right.
That's gonna be gone someday, and then with the little bit field bee farm is
Isn't that
gone.
more,
and
isn't that more,
I know it doesn't fall in
expanding the
large.
historic district than?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why I brought it up a while ago, is to me, architecture is as important as large homes, because you drive through New England and you see a lot of large homes, but they're beautifully done.
Because I'm not in favor of expanding the historic district.
Yeah.
I don't want to see that.
And I tell you, when all those houses are gone, we're gonna forget.
I mean, we just saw an application for L, and I thought architecturally, compared to what's there now, architecturally, that was superior, L was superior to what was there now, in my opinion, but I guess is.
Your opinion.
Yeah, it's my opinion, so I guess, you know, I could certainly point a few homes that definitely don't fit in the character, you know, what you call character block out, but I wouldn't say that particular one is outside.
Right.
You know, and so, and I don't know how we would even entertain, right, trying to change the body of this. It's
But
really tough.
That's why we have Allison.
Right. But at some point, that's when, and when is it? Is it 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now? People are gonna have a history of Block Island.
Yeah.
Coffee tables, because it won't be easier.
That's why
And
I'm
do we
thinking
want to
it's
control
not
this?
protected. It won't be, it's not protected. There's no incentive for the homeowner to do that unless it is for Pittsburgh.
So what, how do we want
A
to
good example, if
proceed?
you really want to take that down, it's building a replica of it, never look this down. There's no incentive for that happens a lot, and I think also people just aren't well informed enough to know how they can preserve a house. Maybe, you know, we're assuming a lot about a home when it tears down a house. We don't know their situation, we don't know what they understand, their architect, they don't know.
And yeah, and usually sometimes you get a house that is just so deteriorated.
It's,
You don't have a choice.
right, it's torn down from neglect.
Right,
Or
exactly.
you have a choice, but you don't have the money to replicate it exactly. what you need.
So we do agree
So-
on lot size being a factor. We do agree on the character of the neighborhood being a factor.
And the island, the character of that.
No, that would be the neighborhood.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right, so can we continue with that?
I think that's a good summation so far. I think we are sort of running out of time.
Oh, one more thing, we also seem to agree on the need for flexibility for the ratio between footprint and height, allowing for horizontal expansion to compensate for going up.
And that, wouldn't that fall under a special use permit anyway,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
So-
as long as, if you meet the standards, then in theory, you would be granted the special use permit. But just what you were saying, I hope Mark doesn't mind, but I looked up his property really quickly and, but this is a good example. No, this is.
She has your addition designed. on
Yes.
it.
But it's a really good example. So if you have a lot size between 25,000 square feet and 34,000 square feet, you're allowed 4%. So for Mark, it's 37,000 square feet. So it's just 3,000 square feet over that.
300.
So it's a difference of if he's allowed 1,131 right now of coverage, but if his lot size was 3,000 square feet less, then he would be allowed 15,000 square feet. 1,500, sorry, 1,500 square feet.
And 1,500 square feet is gonna seem big on one level.
But if
But
it's
it's-
smaller, he could have more than the larger.
I mean, I shouldn't say.
That's where it
big,
doesn't-
It's ample. It's a good sized house at 1,500 all on one level. You put it into two levels. And yeah, you end up with a box and you end up with.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is that he's not allowed to do, it's 1131.
So that's a different section of the zoning ordinance.
That's just the regular, that's just dimensional standards, but I was seeing it as an example, when you start putting those thresholds in, how something like.
They were like related, like the
Yeah.
non-standard had steps, but in between, like 5 acres and 6 acres, maybe with 5.5, maybe you get 50% of that allowed.
Anyway, Allison, have we given you enough to work on it for a couple of days?
Yeah, I think there seems to be consensus on wanting a little more flexibility on homes that are a single level in regards to, I mean, that 2,000 square foot trigger for a special use permit. If it's a single level, I think that could be increased. So I'll come up with some draft language, specific language for you to review that would provide more flexibility for single level homes. Yeah, and especially in regards to footprint. I mean, that's what I'm trying, so it does encourage now, there's no bonus really for a lower height, a single level. And, but I don't know, I think the 2,000 is tight, the 3,500 absolute maximum, is that something for a single level you'd also like to increase? Or is it the special use trigger?
Special trigger. A special use trigger.
And then,
because we've seen in the past that people design right up to the last 10, 12 inches of what they're allowed. So yes, I think we want flexibility, but we definitely have to have some checks and balances.
well, yeah, definitely have a maximum, but I didn't know if you wanted that to go up a little bit for single level, but I'll have something to respond to.
Some alternates that we can take a look at with.
Yeah.
I love a couple of concrete examples because I visualize it better that way than I do the abstract. So if you could do that for us too, that would be helpful.
And I'll take a stab at coming up with that lot size variation based on the Chilmark example and a couple others nearby examples.
I'm very intrigued with that. So that would be something that I'd love to have you explore a little bit in relation to our situation here.
I don't have.
Mark?
Oh,
Allison, quickly, what was the date of that email you sent on Martha Vineyard, November?
There was in the, it was,
November 3rd, 2021.
Thanks, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
but it was just recently recirculated, the one page of it last week.
Yeah, it's just, I'll show you what it looks like.
Okay.
I included that last page of that memo that summarizes examples from other communities. And that one does use total square footage of the lot, but doesn't mean you could still do that without being, it could be for a singular structure. Or we could change the number.
Before you adjourn, just to extend an invitation on behalf of the town council, with all these wonderful people in your brain power, if you can figure out this 513 in 45 days or in 2 months, or we would like to employ you for a bad issue coming up.
Thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I can't put my.
You can email it to us, Jen.
Yeah, it's just one page and it doesn't, it's not in a memo format. Right, it was, no,
it's page 4 of 4.
Page 4 of 4.
Oh.
Examples from other communities.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
It's page 4 of the
Mine says,
Says
November
page-
30, 2021.
Page 4,
But this was
Anyway, I
just,
make a motion that the meeting be adjourned. And thank you guys very much. There's a lot of great power today. I really appreciate it. This is not easy. It is fun. It's fun, it's challenging, it's definitely necessary, but it's not easy.
I saw